Hi everybody, Colin Stevenson here, joined by my hero John Lenhart. Hi John.
Hi.
So this is very exciting because we left people on a cliffhanger the last time we spoke about a manuscript that you were writing, and we didn't get any further than that. And I've been I've been waiting a week to hear this myself. So if you can please take us to where the manuscript went or where it was going by this point, please, John.
Right. So this episode and the one on Thursday are two really big episodes I have not shared with anybody, and people have been asking me about this, and we're going to finally do it here, Colin. So if you remember, I wrote this manuscript. I joined this emergent church, this church for people who've been hurt by church. It's just a collection of people hanging out in a bar on Sunday morning, and joined the church in like December. And then they asked me, the emergent pastor asked me to teach my manuscript in January. I started teaching it. The church was already going pretty good, but it really boomed. And by April, I was done teaching my manuscript. The church was at about 150 people, and it started the previous September. I said it upset a third of the people. A third of the people liked it. A third of the people were kind of oblivious. That summer, I focused on the third who liked it. Another third, some of the people who were upset and some of the people who liked it, they went and started their own churches. So some people actually left, started their own churches. And that wasn't it was kind of adversarial, which is fine. Around September, so about a year after the church had started, I had said to the pastor, look, we're upsetting a third of your church because they were being crabs on the people growing. We're going to leave. And by the end of that year, we were completely out. We were fine. We didn't get kicked out. Everything was fine. So that was like the year journey of doing that. And then I said, we found out that Modeling God was going to get published. So I want to explain what happens with the book getting published. The first 2 years of the book getting published, it's a wild story. However, I'm going to need to go backwards to give some backstory. If you remember, just like when I got hired by Cleaning Systems, all of a sudden I said, oh, then I found out why I got hired. And it was a backstory. There's a backstory. The story can get complicated, so I'm really going to need your help, Colin. Ask any question for clarification, but it's going to involve, the story's going to involve three churches and the people in the church, and it's a wild story, and it might be hard to believe it sometimes. So I'm going to give it a shot. So here's how this goes. 20 years ago from today, there was a woman who attended this church, and I'm going to call this church the Big Church. She attended this big church, and she published a series of prophecies that said the big church was going to split 7 ways. She left the big church and joined another church. I'm going to call that church the Ambitious Church. So she went to the Ambitious Church. The ambitious pastor had 3 elders say her prophecies are true, and then those 3 elders shortly left the church afterwards. So there might have been some issues going on there. Now, prior to all of this, the emergent pastor was the youth pastor at the big church. That's what I didn't know. So the emergent pastor had been the youth pastor at the big church. The big pastor wanted his son to be the youth pastor, and so he basically kicked the emergent pastor out of his church. Now, the emergent pastor had a 6-month non-compete.
Right, okay.
So we've been talking about non-competes and everything. Now it's in the church.
Yeah.
He had to wait 6 months to start a church. A couple of the people who were former youths under him were now adults. They kind of gathered together with him for Bible studies. They hung out every week. And then those 3, at the end of 6 months, those 3 former youths started the emergent church and put this guy in as the pastor. And then we joined basically 4 months after that church started. So we didn't know any of this was going around. There was this war, people coming out of this big church. Now, the ambitious pastor was focused on trying to have the biggest church. That's why I'm calling him ambitious pastor. Yeah. And in order to do that, he believed he needed to make these prophecies come to pass. So his goal was to split the big church. That's what he was trying to do. He went to the emergent pastor and his wife, and found out that they believed the big pastor's son had an inappropriate relationship with an underage girl. So the ambitious pastor hired a lawyer and started attacking the big church's, son, the son of the big pastor, and trying to split this thing.
Yep.
Around the time he hired the lawyer and did these public attacks, that's when we had left the emergent church. So where I was previous in the story, I was outside of this controversy. And now what we have is we have these three churches kind of going at it. This emergent church in the shadows helping this ambitious church go after the son of the big, pastor of the big church. Now this is 2007. So now we're in 2007. 2007, a woman from the ambitious church read my manuscript. She had had depression for over 7 years. She read the manuscript, cured of depression. She said she would be one of the testimonials on the back of my book if it ever got published. Well, we found out it was getting published. I had gone to the big pastor because a lot of the people I was helping in this emergent church who kind of came, out of the emergent church, and I was still helping them, they had gone to the big church. A lot of these people who went to the emergent church had gone to this big church. So I was helping them. Once they left the emergent church, were talking to the big pastor. The big pastor found out about my book and he said, "Hey, I'd like to read a copy of it. I might even give you a testimonial." So I sent him manuscripts to see if he would write something. Again, I resubmitted it. The publisher said he was going to publish it, but he wanted to publish it to the Christian community. And I'd had this experience with the pastors. These pastors, I would say, are not good people. They don't have a good heart. They can't be challenged. And I wanted it to atheists. He said, "No, John, they're good people. Let's publish it to these Christians." Now, the publisher, saw these 4 principles. He wanted everything to come from a science perspective, and he wanted a name for those 4 principles that always determine truth. So I called them modelletics. And it was a takeoff of the term apologetics. In the Christian church, they all value apologetics. Now, the word apology means a defense. When you say apology, you're really making a defense. Apologetics is the ability to defend yourself well and convince others, even if you're wrong.
Yeah.
The church values apologetics. Ravi Zacharias was the greatest apologist we've ever seen. And he was so good at it, he convinced people in his own organization to let him abuse women all over the world for the last 10 years. That's what the church wanted. I was offering them a way to determine the truth. Think they'd want that? I would think everybody would want that, right? So that's how the publisher put that in my book. There's this modelletics from science. It determines the truth. Let's apply this to your beliefs, your religion, God, salvation, and then we could finally get to the truth.
Yeah.
So the whole point there was, if you apply these 4 principles, you'll understand the Bible more clearly, and you'll hear from God more often and more clearly. So that's what we call grace. So that's what was going on. So Modeling God was published. Here it is. Modeling God was published July 7th, 2007. 777. How do you like that, Colin?
Mega. Now, right, I can't go into that just now because it'll take me too long. Carry on, please. That's mega.
So the big pastor had asked for copies, never wrote me an endorsement, never nothing. I'm not even sure he read the manuscript. I sent him a bunch of copies of my book and he said he would read it. And then the publisher had me go to the International Christian Retelling Show in Atlanta. And I also did interviews on radio shows throughout the country, throughout the United States. And I wrote to seminaries to say, "Hey, I have this information in this book, would you like to use it? Would you like to, look at this, see what you think of this?" None of them, "Would you write me a comment?" None of them would comment on my book. Now, remember, I said I had started a blog, and it was at this time that this guy heard me on one of these radio shows, and he was from California, and he started writing me, telling me I was wrong. I was writing him back and forth, and that was Ed Mabry.
Oh, right, okay.
So that's how I met Ed Mabry. Is Ed Mabry heard me get interviewed on a national radio show, and he wrote me, went to my blog, then wrote me through my blog, and we argued back and forth. That's how I dealt with him. Now, I have a couple of interesting stories just on interviews, two quick stories. One of them was I was on a Christian show and I was talking about the importance of defining your terms. And there was two guys on the show. I think it was like on the East Coast of the United States. And I said, it's important to define your terms. I said, people think they know the definition of a word and then they can't give the definition of a word. And the one guy was going, like what? And I said, like the word good. You were using the word good. What's your definition of good? He goes, well, it's the other guy started just laughing his head off and this guy got mad. On the air, this guy got super mad that he could not define the word good. I was also on a radio show with a guy who was a conspiracy theorist. It was a late at night show and he just liked to rip people. So he kind of was trying to rip me about God's evil and God, and started talking about prayer. And in my book, I explain that prayer works according to justice. You have to have spiritual value or karma or justice behind you for God to listen to it. He just ripped that idea, was doing that. And I said to him, do you have kids? And he goes, yeah, I got 2 kids. I said, so if one of them comes to you and just asks you for stuff, and the other one asks you for stuff, how do you decide who you give stuff to? Do you just give it to them no matter what they say, even though they've been bad? He goes, no. I go, how do you decide? He goes, merit. I go, it's the same way with God. Change the subject, like right on the air. He just changed the subject like it was nothing. But it's all these unconscious conversations. Like, I'm not afraid of doing a radio interview, but it was kind of after that, no one wanted to have me on the radio because I could sit there and like, if you take a shot at me, I'm going to be a nice guy. But the minute you take a shot at me, samurai, I'm going to backward step. If you lunge at me, I'm going to backward step and I'm going to cut your head off. And that's what I was doing. I was handling all these guys that way. And it was just funny that way. Anyways, when the ambitious pastor heard about how, this woman was on the back of the book and it was in his church and she had been in his church for 7 years and hadn't been helped in her depression. And this book fixed it like that. He said, only the devil gets results that fast. And he started writing a refutation of the book and he started telling everybody I was a cult leader and I was satanic.
So he's now telling people that you're a cult leader and you're satanic, even though you've got the truth and you have helped this woman that had depression for 7 years come out at the drop of a hat, and that's evil. Because
I helped her. God doesn't even move that fast, was his point. So only the devil, this is a pastor now, the ambitious church, and he's saying only the devil moves that fast.
Yeah, okay.
So, well, he's ambitious too. He doesn't want somebody in his church getting help from a book. And so now he's actively trying to write against the book. He's working on this refutation against the book. Now, there was the youth in this lawsuit refused to testify against. So this ambitious pastor had put everything in to this youth, young girl testifying. She ended up refusing to testify. And the case was dismissed and he was humiliated. Publicly, all his plans went right down the drain. So he immediately decided to focus his church and everybody else away from his humiliating defeat. And the only way to do that was to attack somebody. And so guess who he attacked?
You.
And we were out of that emergent church by then. So he put up a refutation of modeling God. It had over 200 factual inaccuracies, not even opinion. There were two, like John says, Jesus is not the Son of God. On page 27, I blatantly say Jesus is the Son of God. So he just made stuff up, 200 things. It was thrown together. It was just poorly done. I would get people who would write me emails and say, hey, John, really enjoying your book, but did you know there's this pastor who's like made stuff up about it? I'm like, yeah, I know. He's got a website. He called it lenharteatsrocks.com. And he was just out and out, just trying to trash me in order to distract people from the fact that he was trying to take down this other church and he was unable to do it.
An actual website, to trash you. Surely it's not lawful anyway.
Well, we're going to get there. It definitely wasn't lawful. None of this is lawful. So none of these other pastors were reading this And so he wrote a letter on church stationery telling everybody in our area, over 250,000 people, churches in every area, stay away from this guy. He's heretical. He says the following things. No one read my book. They all read his refutation. It was like a 20-page refutation. He sent it out to people to have them read it. And there was 200 inaccuracies in the whole thing. So the worst part of this is now the big pastor wants everybody distracted that there was this lawsuit. So he joins the ambitious pastor. And now together, so now the big pastor is trashing me in private to all the people that I'm helping that came from his church.
Yeah.
And the ambitious pastor is trashing me all over the world, publicly trying to destroy me on all this stuff. Now, what was happening in my job at this time, I'll say this real quick, and then, what was happening in my job at this time was I was the lead salesman. We'd hired all these people to be salesmen of this chemical, but I was still the best salesman. I was supposed to be in the lab. The company was struggling, and they put us all on, we basically went all on half salary. So I spent half my time helping people. Remember, what I was doing was I was helping people off of antidepressants. I was helping people out of addiction. I was helping people out of bipolar medication. I was helping people not kill themselves. I'm helping people, and this was spreading, and this group that I was in was growing. But now we had this big pastor and this ambitious pastor attacking me and calling me a cult leader and a Satanist, basically.
I can't believe this. So at the moment, while you're doing everything to help everybody except yourself, which is pretty selfless, you're being bounced about not only your town, but now it's getting kind of across states of people putting you down because you have told the truth, and it goes against what has been taught.
Right. So even the emergent pastor was now saying, yeah, we kicked them out of church. They never kicked us out of church.
No, because you
so now people are just lying about me. So I end up reaching out to these pastors saying, look, let's all sit down. Let's sit down and let's talk this out. The ambitious pastor said the only way you are ever going to meet with a group of pastors is it's going to be me and the emergent pastor, and it's going to be for you to confess and repent and for us to restore you. And I could not find one person in this entire area to sort this out. In the Bible, it says you find this wise man. Paul said, is there not one wise man that would meet with you? There was not one person. I was the person who did that. I was the person who sits down and mediates, but who would mediate for the mediator? None of them. All these pastors were running scared because this guy was a bully, and this was going public and national, and none of them read the book, so they just sided with him, and none of these people wanted to sit down and talk this out face to face. They wanted to keep this bullying going and keep it going, on the internet that way.
So the emergent pastor, he's obviously joined forces with the bigger pastor. Now, was he following to gain status, or was he following because he generally believed him over you? What was the connection here?
I think he was hurt because he got left with a bunch of crabs.
Yeah.
So when we left, everybody said, "Oh, no problem. We're going to do fine." And then after we left, they realized we have a church full of oblivious people who not even aware of what's going on, don't even really want to come to church, and we have a bunch of crabs. And so that crab mentality, I believe, took over him. And so that's what happened. So now we're in 2008. The economy's crashing over here. I'm sitting there going, holy cow, our company just might go under. My publisher invited me to the show the second year. Normally you only go to the show 1 year, but he invited me to the show, this International Christian Retailing Show in Orlando for the second year. And so I got some stories to tell you, Colin, for this, because this was a hilarious time. The first thing that happened was the ambitious pastor had contacted my publisher and it trashed me. And in fact, I was going over to Minnesota. I was driving 5 hours one way to help a bunch of guys who come out of prison in a halfway house. Amazing. And I'd gone over there like 3 times. These guys were starting to get better. The ambitious pastor called them up and they wouldn't help me. Yep, wouldn't let me do that anymore. He was, anywhere I was trying to help, he was calling people up and just harassing me that way. He called up my publisher. That's why my publisher invited me out. He invited me out and said, hey, this crazy pastor is, he won't listen to reason. He's acting like this. And he goes, I talked to him. I said, talk to John. He won't talk to you. I hear that. He goes, publisher said, I'm sorry, John, you're right. You told me these pastors don't have a good heart. I really thought they did. Because remember, he was coming out of this magazine, these Christian magazines, and he started his own publishing company to get the truth out. And he was like, it's been a while since I actually dealt with pastors. And he goes, you're right. They don't have a good heart. Now, the show is in Orlando. And there's a thing in Orlando called the Holy Land Experience. It's basically Disney World for the Bible. And Bill Maher did a movie called Religulous, where he went to the Holy Land Experience and talked to the character of the guy who plays Jesus. Well, at this trade show, you have a big old trade show. And I don't know if you've ever been to these trade shows, but there's certain locations and there's certain pathways where the biggest people pay the most money to get there. And then you have these areas that are nothing. And they gave them the corner, far away from everything, spot for the Holy Land Experience. So if you wanted to go there, take a trip and go see that. Well, Jesus was there and he would walk around. So I walked up to him and he's a really nice guy. I got him to hold this book and take a picture of it. I was laughing so hard. It took me 3 attempts to take the picture because I was laughing so hard. But I have a picture of Jesus holding this book, like going, hey, I like this book. So I loved it. Now, I got to tell you, I ran into him over, in this bad section. And when I say bad section, at these shows, there are these people who are selling trinkets and other people call it Jesus junk. So you got to imagine wherever you find all these, things that have anything religious on it that are little, bookmarkers or wristbands or whatever, there's companies that sell it. Yep. And I was there when this happened. These people are sitting there, selling their Jesus junk, right? Just to make money. And they look up and I thought they would all crap their pants. They look up and who's walking down the aisle? Jesus. They're unconscious going, he is going to freak out. I'm selling stuff, and he's going to flip over the table like I stood there and I got ahead of him. And I just watched him walk down every aisle. Nicest guy. But every time people from the Jesus stuff looked up, like the next day, the show started. The second day the show started, there was this announcement 5 minutes before the show started. Because I got the inside, I was with the publisher. There was this announcement that said, by the way, will all caricatures for booths remain within the booth? And I felt like he said, that means you, Jesus. I think so many people complain that Jesus walking around, they're all there selling stuff. And Jesus walking around and they're just all freaking out. I think they all complained and they required him to stay in his booth. They didn't want Jesus walking around at this trade show.
So at this point, did you know did he know what the book was to you? Did he know anything about this book?
He's just I think he's server compassion. And he's just the nicest, honestly, he's the nicest guy in the world. They picked the perfect guy to play that role because you could just sit and talk to him for days, Colin, and he's just so nice. He's a really super nice guy. Now, I'll tell you one thing, not being nice, because now I've read the Bible. I know how the Bible works because I have these 4 principles. And I'm walking by this booth and these guys are introducing this new Bible. It's a redo of an old Calvin Bible, John Calvin. And this guy, I'm trying to walk down the path and this guy goes, hey, take a look at this Bible. And I look at him, I go, no, thanks. He goes, no, seriously, you should look at this Bible. You read the Bible? I go, absolutely. He goes, well, take a look at this. I go, you don't want me to do this. So 2 guys behind him suddenly turned and walked up. So now there's 3 of them there. It's like 3 guys like, come on, read this. I go, fine. I take it and I open it up to Mark 10, verses 11 and 12, and I read it to them. And basically in every Bible except for the King James and the ASV, which no one owns those Bibles. Every other Bible is owned by somebody. In both those Bibles, it's Jesus saying, if a man divorces a woman and marries another, he commits a sin. If a woman divorces a man and marries another, he commits a sin. And I said, this is interesting. And I do this all the time. And I've written to Bible, people who make Bibles to ask this question. In Deuteronomy, in the Old Testament, it says you could divorce somebody and marry another. Jesus is saying this guy can't. So is he saying that breaking the law, that doing the law basically results in sin? That's what this verse is saying now. I said, worse than that, the next verse, he's saying if a woman divorces a man, in the Old Testament, a woman couldn't divorce a man. Doesn't sound like Jesus knows the law. So the Jesus in your Bible says doing the law results in sin, and he doesn't know the law. He's wrong. This would make Jesus not the Son of God. The two guys behind him turn and take off. Like, I don't want to be a part of this at all. The guy I'm looking at, I go, so what's your answer to that, buddy? Are you putting out a Bible saying Jesus is the Son of God? I go, I told you you didn't want to do this with me. And then just walk away. So no one wants to mess with me with the Bible, because if you interpret exactly what it says, there is an answer, because the word's putting away. But all these people have changed. I've done a study where I've shown Bibles every 10 years from 1960 to the current, and they changed the verses dealing with marriage and divorce in the Bible to conform to our culture. So God is changing his doctrine every 10 years to fit us, and people are making money off this, and no one wants to talk about this.
Yeah. So adultery is against the law. Okay, really, it's against the laws of nature, the laws of relationship. It's against the law, right? Since society changes, that could mean that religion is changing society every time it's rewritten.
That's exactly what they're doing. They're creating their own religion, and that's my point. So at this same time, on a blog, I put up my second book about God's will and God's plan. Because remember, I was modeling all that. So I put up my second book. I was never interested in writing a book. I never wanted to do this. I tried to give this stuff away. I was trying to do all of that. So the final portion of the story for the first 2 years is during that summer of 2008, a painter, a guy who was painting, had hired people that were in our group who had gotten all this healing. They told him about modeling God, so he read it twice.
Amazing.
This guy read Modeling God twice, and he met with me, and he wanted to get to the bottom of this. Now, his wife was having some issues, and they were going to the big church. His wife was going to the big church. He was going to the emergent church. He was one of the oblivious guys at the emergent church. His wife was going to the big church. And so they sent over an associate pastor, another woman, to pray for his wife. And they looked over the coffee table, saw Modeling God. And the associate pastor said, the big pastor says, that book is heretical. Don't read it. So now he was publicly stating that. I wrote the big pastor and said, hey, are you stating, because remember, I gave him manuscripts. We were having these conversations. It was the other pastor saying, well, now I know this guy's saying it privately. So I said to the big pastor, did you say this book is heretical? Or is your associate pastor saying you said it and he's lying? Either way, I want to address it. If your associate pastor's lying, I want to address it. If you're saying I want to address it, he wouldn't. He tried to dismiss it. I kept, he tried to distract. I kept doing that. He finally, we cut a deal, because I couldn't get anybody to state a position about this. He said, I will have my elders read this book and they will write a public opinion about it, which would be great. Even if they wrote a public opinion, it was heretical. That would be great, because then we could address it. We could have a meeting. We could do that. So he said he would do that. And so this was like in August, September, they didn't write it. October, they didn't write it. I asked them if I could check in with them November. I did. They didn't write it. December, they didn't write it. January, they didn't write it. Finally, in February, they just issued a statement that was nothing. It was a non-denial denial. They didn't take any position. They didn't say anything, and they wanted to be done. So now realize this big pastor had made a deal to avoid having to deal with this issue, and he welched out of this second deal, basically, and it made a bunch of people mad. So the painter now, he was one of the people at the emergent church who was one of these oblivious people. He decided he wanted to get to the bottom of this. He's like, what is going on? What is the deal? What is going on with this whole thing? I want to find out what's going on. He met with me, and I said, if you can find one person in this valley that I did one thing wrong to, I'll confess and repent to him. Do it. He spent the next 6 months And basically what he did was he would go to person A and say, what did John Lenhart do wrong? I've heard you say John Lenhart. You go, well, it wasn't to me, but it was to B and C. He'd go to B. What did John Lenhart do to you? A said, well, no, it wasn't me. It was C and D. He'd go to C. Well, it wasn't me. It was A. No, A said he didn't do anything wrong to him. Well, it was E and F. For 6 months, he did that. All of this came down to one guy. And this one guy, his wife was in the big church. He was in the emergent church, but he was friends with the big pastor. And he was telling the big pastor, I was trying to take over his church.
Oh.
There was nobody who said who has one claim against me. It's just all gossip and rumor and defamation and all this other stuff. When the painter left that guy, that afternoon, that guy took a ride in an ambulance. He had a heart issue and the ambulance got called to his house. He got taken away.
Karma came back.
Absolutely. So the painter started reaching out to these pastors to try to get them all together, to try to, have some sort of meeting. And he ended up having a meeting with the big pastor, and it went bad. I mean, the associate pastors, the big pastors, they couldn't handle themselves well. And they overestimated or underestimated this painter, because I'm helping these guys and they're all becoming better. So now they thought they could just swat this guy away as a fly, and they couldn't do that. So all these people started writing letters, the painter and other people, to the big pastor, his associates, his elders, the ambitious pastor, associates, elders. All these people would respond and go, and I have all the emails. I didn't know that. I didn't realize that's wrong. I'll talk to the pastor. I'll talk to my pastor. Next response was always from the ambitious and the big, just bullying. These guys put on a master class. They essentially, the people under them knew this was wrong, but they didn't want to get bullied by these people in charge. And these people in charge just funneled everything to them. And I believe they flipped and seared their conscience just by just bullying and just knocking people down. And the problem is if you think about it, the reason why they'd never meet with me is their response would preclude them from being a pastor in 3 different areas. Number one, if they didn't read the book, then everything they're saying is what's called whispering or gossiping. The word gossip is in the Bible, it's whisper. And if you whisper against another believer in order to separate them out, which is the law of defamation, which you already in the United States, but if you do it in the Bible, that's called an abomination to God. It's bearing false witness, but it's also in Proverbs called abomination. Do you think people who commit abominations to God go to heaven?
Right, okay, so he's now getting himself dug this hole for himself, really, and you're now starting to reap the karmic benefits, would I say? Karma's starting to be on your side now, because everything's been proven as wrong, everything's been proven in your favor, so now energetically you'll be growing and he'll be diminishing.
Right, so 99% of these pastors never read the book, so they're whisperers. They are committing abominations of God. The one pastor who read it, if his interpretation is wrong, then he's showing he doesn't know how to interpret text, which means he shouldn't be interpreting the Bible. Worse, and this is the key point with the only pastor who read the book. If you're saying I have a heretical belief, you got to give the right answer. You cannot say, I think what you're saying is heretical, Colin, but I don't have the right answer. When he gives the right answer, if it's wrong, guess who the heretic is?
Yeah.
So the reason why no one would meet with me is they would lose. So the only play they had was to bully me. And one of the analogies I like to use is there's this guy, Mel Bartholomew, who created this new method of gardening called the square foot method. And he says it's a more efficient way to garden. And he shared it. And he thought all the experts would love it. But it's all the people who don't know anything about gardening love it, or all the people who struggle with gardening. And he likes to say, if you don't know anything about gardening and you read my book, it's going to take a certain amount of time for you to get it. Yeah. If you're an expert in gardening and you read my book, it's going to take twice as long for you to get it.
Because you need to unlearn before you relearn.
And he was called by these people a heretic for being this gardening guy, just like me. So the problem is all the experts, in order to understand something totally new and different, they would have to unlearn everything they know in order to understand it. So to them, it immediately seems wrong. But even in this other area, he said that. And remember, he invented the square foot gardening method. I discovered it. There's a difference between inventing the Pacific Ocean and discovering it. I didn't invent anything in modeling God. I didn't even like it. I read the Bible with these 4 principles, understood what it says in a non-contradictory fashion. Then I had to go through my own process of living, which was brutal. I didn't like it, but I'm not inventing anything. I'm discovering it, which means it's God's information. Yeah, so if you're attacking me, you're not attacking me, you're attacking God. And then one of the classic areas, I'll tell you another one with doctrine. In the Bible, intercourse is marriage. Yeah. There aren't any church marriages. The church marriages and covenant and contract marriages began in like the 1700s with the Fleet Marriage Act in England. So from the beginning of time to like 1700, marriage was always intercourse. Yeah. And in the Bible, that's what it is. So when a pastor says sex before marriage is wrong,
the sex is marriage, effectively.
So but see, they're teaching man's definition of marriage. Yeah. So sex before man's definition of marriage is wrong according to man. Sex is marriage according to God. So these pastors are teaching man's doctrine from the pulpit rather than God's. When the big pastor found that out, he was correcting public speakers about it because he realized he was off. He was never going to do this in public to us. But all this stuff started leaking back to him, and he started realizing, yeah, he has got the wrong information. He liked to see himself as a great Bible teacher, but that's how we were doing it, is we were helping people understand they were doing the wrong thing. So one of the things is this big pastor passed this book around from Chuck Colson, and Chuck Colson said, Christians never initiate an attack. The unbelievers or the pagans always do. I never initiated any of this, Colin. All these pastors initiated bullying on me. And the Bible gives the way to communicate. We've shared the healthy communication, the 3 ways. A bully always does the opposite of the way God said to do it. That's what these pastors were doing. They initiated all these attacks, and they were talking according to man's strategy or apologetics to defend themselves, and they were pushing a man's doctrine on me. So they're really fighting with God. They're not fighting with me. So the one thing I want to, as we close this up, I want to read this passage from The Boy Who Raised a Dog. It's a great book on trauma. And every chapter in here has a different story. And there was a story in here about in Texas, how people started saying this, there was this cult, the satanic cult, and people just got wildly out of control. And it wasn't true at all, but big people in big places did this. So I'm going to read three little sentences that he says in here. He goes, "It was amazing was how the fear sparked by this pathetic investigation spread and caused otherwise rational people to behave in bizarre ways. I saw that. This one guy writing this thing caused people to act just crazy. Once belief in the power of the cult and its evil activities had been established, it was almost impossible for people to acknowledge contrary evidence. We would show them evidence. We would try to sit. They didn't want to sit and talk, and they didn't want to see any evidence. And when people did see evidence, they're going, well, the pastor needs to know this. The ambitious pastor the big pastor needs to know this. Never heard from those people again. But rather than re-examine their initial assumptions, those involved with the investigation simply became further and further detached from reality. And that's what I saw. I saw pastors and Christians become detached from reality.
Yep. Now, just while we kind of speak about this, the way things have moved on from religion and stuff, as you say, every kind of 10 years it's rewritten. There's more laws and more rules that come in to people, and that does change a society, because the fact that the world is run mostly on religions, we'll say religions, yeah, because that's how we're all divided in humanity, but it's also how we're all controlled as well. Now, because they're able to change it, or we found this new book, so they're not exactly changing, they're finding new information, which is the best way to put it out, because trust the science, the way that people go on about this, it changes the way society is. So what you've done is you've been right back to the beginning, you've worked out and read the way that the real information was there, right? So nobody owns it. We don't know where it came from. Nobody will ever be able to explain that because we'll never be able to travel back in time in the near future anyway. So you've discovered the truth. Then the truth get put on to people who could not take the truth because they've been indoctrinated with otherwise. Your definition of a good person will depend on how somebody acts when they are wrong, not because they are liked and not because they are put in a position to be able to teach other people. Now, just bear with me a little second here. The story you've just told me is literally what's happening in the world. Yes, with religion, but it's also working with mental health. It's also the exact same as what's happening with coaches, with all these different people that are being indoctrinated by the system to try and help people come out of their depression, and this is why they're hurting them and making them worse. However, you and I came together through the conjunctive that was truth, and we brought our both ways of working together, which we didn't know where it came from. We discovered it through, again, going back and going over and learning. And it kind of brings things to just into head for me just now as to where that you and I will be going forward in this, you know. But the fact that this story takes you back to the beginning, no one wants to know the truth. They all want it, but they can't handle it.
That's an excellent summary. That's exactly how, you know, I never backed down from a fight before. I wasn't going to back down from this, and psychology needs to know I'm not going to back down because it's all the same. So for me to wrap this up, at the end of 2008, I essentially got fired from a job that I was part owner in, and through legal maneuverings. But our company's just falling apart because of 2008, you know, the economy was falling apart.
Yeah.
So all that stuff fell apart. And so the way to summarize all of this is that this all happened because there was this ambitious pastor trying to distract people from a mistake he made. There was this big pastor who was attacking me privately. There were these crabs in this emergent church attacking me. And then there was this ambitious pastor attacking me publicly and took the responsibility for anybody having to read my book. When people read my book, they got healed, and then they'd reach out to me. But otherwise, everybody was out there hindering me from being able to work with larger groups of people and holding this information back.
But they're effectively holding these people back from being healed. So they were being hurt by the church. And that was our definition that we used. I think we used it back at the very beginning. You know, the church does hurt people because they're not using the truth and God's truth. What they're using is the man-made truth in order to control people, in my belief. So
right. I like to say, here would be my last analogy. I like to say that I feel like a guy who went to a garage sale and bought a painting for $1. And as I'm walking down the driveway, I suddenly realize it's a Monet. It's worth $100 million. And I go back to the owner and I say, hey, this painting you sold me is $1 for $1. It's a Monet. It's $100 million. Would you paid it. You bought it. No, I'm not taking it back. No. I'm saying let's split 50 million. No, you bought it. Get out of here. But I will call the cops. Get out of here. Okay. The Bible is your Monet.
Yeah.
I looked in your Bible and saw this information that would help you and these people, and you don't want me anywhere near your property.
It's unbelievable. And it's unbelievable. And it's like people are actually fighting the truth away, but still wanting it at the same time. So it's a total contradiction. And again, you and I are all about non-contradiction and different things. So I hope people have listened to your story and they understand where you and I are both coming from, especially how you've lived and how you've come through this. I mean, that must have been a very difficult time to live through, knowing that you know, and then being fired against about everyone that's meant to know. Because remember, you might have, you've got this connection to God, but you're a scientist. You're the guy that makes surfactants. You're the guy that runs companies and does project management and breaks things down in models. Now, whether this gift you've been given, it's not yours. It was given to you from the divine. So you were given this to be able to really make and open up everything and explode everything open. So whether it's something that's a detergent, right the way to something that's been given out falsely, information and God, this is what you were here to do. So now you're doing it. So you're still effectively in your ikigai to a degree, but just on a larger scale, you know? So people, and I'll just wrap up on this one. If they believe they're wrong, they'll need to ask more questions and they'll need to understand and welcome it in. If someone comes to you with information that can improve your life and people around about your life, listen to it. You know, don't shoot somebody down for whatever. But that was a fascinating story today. It's humbled me a good bit as well, and I'm looking forward to the next one.
Yeah, it only gets worse.
What? Oh, okay, well, next one. Take care, John.